You have to understand, Ollie began, her hands twisting in her lap, I've always been curious about things other people avoided. It's like, the more people warn me not to do something, the harder it is for me to resist. Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't pause. The library was like that. For as long as I can remember, it's been this looming shadow at the edge of town, this presence. Everyone had a story about it, how it was cursed, how people who went inside came out different, or didn't come out at all. But they were just stories. I mean, no one actually saw anything. I figured it was just old folklore to keep kids from vandalizing it. I leaned forward slightly, watching as her gaze drifted to the window, her voice lowering as though the memories themselves demanded reverence. But for me, it was like a puzzle. Every time I walked by, I'd stop and stare at the broken windows and peeling paint, wondering what could possibly be so dangerous. And then there was that book. Her fingers tightened around each other, a small shiver running through her. I used to dream about it. I didn't even know it was real, but in my dreams, it was always the same, a thick, leather-bound book, covered in strange markings. I'd see myself flipping through its pages, though I could never remember what was written there when I woke up. So when I finally decided to go inside, it wasn't just out of curiosity. It felt inevitable. She hesitated for the first time, her eyes meeting mine as though searching for reassurance. It was the night of the festival. Everyone else was at the town square, and I figured if I was ever going to do it, that was the time. I told myself I'd just look around, maybe snap a photo or two to prove it wasn't anything special. I wasn't scared. Not at first. Her voice softened, and I could almost feel the cold air of that night creeping into the room. The door was heavier than I expected. It creaked so loudly when I pushed it open that I froze, sure someone would hear. But the street was empty. Everyone was at the festival, and I was completely alone. She took a deep breath, her hands still now as if grounding herself. The air inside, it was stale, like the whole place had been sealed for years. Dust coated everything, and the shelves were packed with books that looked older than the town itself. I could feel the weight of the silence. Even my footsteps sounded muffled, like the room was swallowing every noise. And then I saw it. Her eyes lit up for a moment, though the unease in her expression remained. The book. It was exactly like in my dreams, same worn leather cover, same strange symbols. It was sitting on this pedestal, like it had been waiting for me. I don't even remember walking toward it. 1 second, I was at the door, and the next, I was standing right in front of it. She paused, swallowing hard. I don't know why I opened it. I told myself it was just a book, just ink and paper. But the second I touched it, I felt it. Like a pulse, running up my arms and straight into my chest. It was alive. And the writing. Her voice trailed off, and for a moment, the room was silent except for the ticking of the clock. I couldn't read it, not really, but I understood it. The words, it's like they were written just for me, answering questions I didn't even know I had. It was intoxicating. The more I read, the more I felt like I was unraveling something huge, something that could change everything. Her hands tightened again, her knuckles white. But then I noticed the shadows. They weren't right. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, the flickering of my flashlight making the shelves look like they were moving. But the longer I stared, the more I realized they were moving. Like they were watching me. She looked up at me again, her eyes wide, her voice trembling. I told myself to leave, to put the book down and go, but I couldn't. It was like my hands were glued to the pages. And then I heard it. Her voice dropped to a whisper. A voice, low and cold, like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It was saying something in the same language as the book, but I couldn't make out the words. All I knew was that it wasn't happy I was there. For the first time, her composure cracked, and her voice broke as she finished. I don't know why I didn't run right then. Maybe it was pride, or maybe I thought I was imagining it. But one thing was clear, I wasn't supposed to be there. And whatever was watching me, wanted me out. I didn't leave, Ollie began, her voice shaking as she pulled her sleeves down over her hands. I should have, but I didn't. Something in me, call it stubbornness, curiosity, or just plain stupidity, made me stay. I told myself I was imagining the shadows. That the voice was just, my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. She leaned forward, her gaze fixed on the floor. I picked up the book again, thinking maybe if I finished reading whatever it was trying to tell me, I'd understand what was happening. The words on the page had changed. They weren't the same as before. At first, I thought I'd turned to a new section, but no. The symbols, they were shifting, right there in front of me. Rearranging themselves into something different. Something, angrier. Her breath hitched as she continued. The whispers started again, louder this time. I couldn't understand them, but I felt them. They weren't words anymore, they were emotions. Fear. Rage. And this, desperate need to make me stop. My hands were trembling, but I couldn't put the book down. I don't even know if I wanted to. She paused, her hands gripping the armrests of the chair tightly. Then the room got colder. Not just a little colder, but freezing, like the air had been sucked out completely. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I thought the batteries were dying. But then it went out completely, and I was plunged into darkness. Her voice dropped, barely above a whisper. I couldn't see anything. Just black. And then, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere deep in the library. They echoed, like whoever, or whatever, it was wanted me to know they were coming. She closed her eyes, as if trying to block out the memory. I froze. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there clutching the book like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. The footsteps got closer, and I swear I felt something brush past me. Like a hand, but colder. I wanted to scream, but I was too afraid to make a sound. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the footsteps stopped. Her hands were shaking now, but she kept going. I don't know how long I stood there in the dark, waiting for something to happen. Minutes? Hours? It felt like forever. And then, the whispers came back. But this time, they weren't angry. They were pleading. Begging me to leave. I don't know how I understood them, but I did. They didn't want to hurt me. They just didn't want me there. Her voice broke, and she finally looked up at me. That I realized I was in over my head. I dropped the book and started running, feeling my way through the dark, trying to remember where the door was. I was so sure something was following me. Every step I took, I felt it behind me, closing in. She took a deep, shuddering breath. When I finally found the door, it wouldn't open. I pulled and pulled, but it was like it was locked from the outside. And then, I felt it again. That hand. It was on my shoulder this time, cold and heavy. I thought that was it. That I'd never get out. But then, out of nowhere, the door flew open. I fell out onto the steps, and when I looked back, the library was completely dark. No shadows. No whispers. Just silence. Ollie's voice faltered, and she leaned back in her chair, her face pale. I've never been so scared in my life. But what's worse is, I still feel it. Like it's with me. Watching me. And I can't stop thinking about that book. About the words I read. It's like they're burned into my mind, and I can't get rid of them. She stared at me, her expression desperate. What do I do? How do I make it stop? I waited for a moment before speaking, letting her words settle in the room. It's an unsettling story, isn't it? Do you think you would have stayed in that library, Or would you have left the moment things felt wrong? Let me know what you think. Your perspective could help someone who's listening to this story right now. The first night after it happened, I barely slept, Ollie said, her voice faint, like the weight of the memory threatened to drag her under. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt it. The cold hand on my shoulder, the whispers in my ears. It was like they followed me out of that library. Her hands gripped the edge of the chair as if holding on to something solid would keep her grounded. I kept telling myself it wasn't real. That my mind had made it all up because I was scared, because I went looking for something to be afraid of. But then the dreams started. Her gaze flicked to me, searching for something, validation, perhaps, or permission to continue. They weren't dreams, really. More like memories. I'd see myself back in the library, standing in front of that book. Only this time, the shadows weren't just watching. They were moving toward me. Reaching for me. And the book, it wasn't just a book anymore. It was alive. Breathing. Calling me back. She paused, her fingers brushing against her temple. I'd wake up covered in sweat, sometimes with scratches on my arms like I'd been fighting something in my sleep. I didn't want to tell anyone. I mean, who would believe me? So I tried to ignore it. But it kept getting worse. Her voice tightened, and for a moment, she seemed lost in the memory. The whispers started following me during the day. At first, I thought it was just in my head, but I'd hear them everywhere. In the wind. In the static on the TV. Even in other people's voices, like they were echoing something I couldn't understand. Her lips trembled as she lowered her gaze. I stopped going out. Stopped answering my phone. I was afraid that whatever followed me out of that library would hurt someone else if I got too close. But being alone didn't help. If anything, it made it worse. She hesitated, her hands clutching the fabric of her sweater. One night, I thought I saw it. The shadow. It was standing in the corner of my bedroom, just watching me. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. It was like I was frozen, like I couldn't even move. And then it started walking toward me. Her voice cracked, and she took a shaky breath before continuing. I don't remember much after that. Just waking up on the floor with my heart racing and my whole body cold, like I'd been lying in ice. I thought maybe it was a nightmare, but when I looked at the corner, there were scratches on the wall. Long, deep scratches that hadn't been there before. She met my eyes, her expression pleading. I don't know what it wants. I don't even know if it's real, but I can't keep living like this. I can't sleep, I can't eat, I can't think about anything else. I feel like I'm losing my mind. The room fell silent, the air heavy with the weight of her confession. I leaned forward slightly, letting her see the steadiness in my gaze. You're not alone in this, I said gently. Whatever's happening, we'll face it together. But for now, let's focus on what's within your control. Ollie nodded, though her hands were still trembling. For the first time since the session began, she seemed to take a breath that filled her lungs completely. Have you ever had an experience that felt so real, it was hard to convince yourself it wasn't? If Ollie's story resonates with you or brings up any thoughts, I'd love to hear your perspective. Feel free to share, your voice matters. I didn't go back to the library, Ollie said, her voice quieter now, almost defeated. But it doesn't matter. It's like it came with me, or maybe it never really left me at all. She folded her arms tightly across her chest, as though trying to keep something out, or maybe in. The scratches on the wall, they're still there. I've scrubbed at them, painted over them, but they come back. Every time I wake up, it's like they've deepened. Like whatever's doing it is getting angrier. Her shoulders slumped slightly as her gaze dropped to the floor. I started dreaming about it again. The book, the shadows, the whispers, they're all there. But it's different now. The book is open when I see it in the dreams. And there's something calling to me. Like it wants me to go back, to finish what I started. Sometimes, I wake up with the taste of dust in my mouth, like I'm still standing in that library. She looked up, her face pale but determined. I won't go back. I can't. But I feel like it doesn't care. Like it's just waiting for me to give in. Her hands curled into fists, her nails digging into her palms as her voice grew more frantic. I've tried everything, locking my windows, leaving lights on, even staying with friends, but nothing stops it. The whispers, the shadows, the dreams. They just follow me. Last week, I heard someone whispering my name when I was at the grocery store. I turned around, but no one was there. She paused, her voice trembling now. Sometimes, I think it's not just following me. I think it's inside me. I feel it when I'm alone, this coldness, like it's spreading through me. Like it's trying to take over. Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. I waited, giving her space to continue, but when she didn't, I spoke. It sounds like you're carrying a lot of fear right now. Let's take this one step at a time. Her lips pressed together tightly, and she shook her head. You don't get it. It's not just fear. It's worse than that. Sometimes, I don't even feel like myself anymore. It's like I'm slipping away, and something else is taking my place. She clenched her jaw, the desperation in her eyes cutting through the room. I don't know how to fight something I can't see. I don't even know if it's real. What if I'm just crazy? What if this is all in my head, and I'm just losing it? I leaned forward slightly, keeping my voice steady. Ollie, the things you're experiencing are very real to you, and that's what matters right now. Let's focus on grounding you, on finding ways to bring you back to a place where you feel safe and in control. She hesitated, her fingers loosening slightly as she took in my words. For the first time, there was a flicker of something other than fear in her expression, maybe hope, maybe just exhaustion. Do you really think I can get past this? That I can make it stop? I met her gaze, letting her see the conviction in mine. I believe you're stronger than you think. And yes, I do think we can work through this, step by step. But it starts with you trusting yourself again. Ollie nodded slowly, her grip on the armrests easing as she took a deep breath. Okay. I don't know if I can do this, but I'll try. I have to try. The room felt lighter somehow, though the weight of her story still lingered in the air like a shadow. Have you ever faced something that made you question your own reality? Ollie's journey might feel far from over, but sometimes even the smallest steps forward can make the biggest difference. If you're listening, I'd love to know what you think. Do you believe the shadows are real, or is it all in her mind? Let me know, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Ollie's hands trembled as she placed them on her lap. Her voice, though quiet, carried a sharp edge of determination that hadn't been there before. I want to fight this, but I don't even know where to start. It's like everything I thought I knew about myself, about reality, is gone. How do you fight something you can't even touch? She looked at me, her expression both pleading and defiant, as though daring me to give her an answer that made sense of everything. You start by remembering who you are, I said, keeping my voice calm. You've faced this for weeks now. You've been afraid, yes, but you're still here. You're stronger than the fear, Ollie, even if it doesn't feel like it yet. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, though the lines of tension around her eyes remained. I keep telling myself that, but it's hard to believe when I feel so empty. It's like whatever was in that library took something from me, and I don't know how to get it back. She hesitated, her fingers brushing lightly over her wrist as though tracing something invisible. Sometimes I wonder if it left something behind. There's this feeling. Like a weight sitting on my chest, but it's not just heavy. It's cold. It creeps in when I'm alone, and I can't shake it no matter how hard I try. Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. And the dreams, they're different now. It's not just the shadows. I see myself standing in the library, but I'm not me anymore. I'm someone else. Or something else. I don't recognize the face in the mirror, and I wake up feeling like I've lost another piece of myself. She paused, her fingers curling into fists. I want to believe I can beat this, but I don't even know what I'm fighting. Is it the library? The book? Or is it just me? What if this is all my fault? What if I brought this on myself because I couldn't leave well enough alone? I watched her closely, letting her words settle in the room before I spoke. You're asking the right questions, Ollie. But blaming yourself won't get you the answers you need. Curiosity is a part of who you are, and it's not something to punish yourself for. It's what brought you here, what gave you the courage to face this. And that same courage will help you find your way out. Her gaze softened, though doubts in her eyes. But how? Every time I think I'm making progress, something happens to pull me back. Last night, I heard it again, the voice. It wasn't whispering this time. It was louder, angrier. It sounded like it was right outside my door, but when I opened it, there was nothing there. She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself as though shielding against an invisible force. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. I'm so tired, and I'm scared that one day I'll give in and go back. I don't even know what it wants, but I feel like it's waiting for me to make a mistake. Her voice cracked, and for a moment, she looked as though she might break completely. But then she straightened, her jaw tightening as resolve flickered in her expression. I don't want to be afraid anymore. I don't want to run from this, but I need help. I can't do it alone. Her words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable, and I leaned forward slightly, meeting her gaze. You don't have to do it alone. The first step is grounding yourself in the here and now. Let's work on building that foundation together, on taking your power back one piece at a time. You've already shown incredible strength by facing this. Now it's time to use that strength to reclaim what's yours. Ollie nodded slowly, a faint spark of hope in her eyes. Okay. I don't know where to start, but I'll try. I just want to feel like myself again. The room felt lighter, though the shadows of her story still lingered in the corners. Ollie's journey was far from over, but this moment, this choice, was a step forward. What do you think about Ollie's decision to fight back? Have you ever faced something that made you feel powerless, only to find strength you didn't know you had? Share your thoughts if you're comfortable, I'd love to hear your perspective.